If you've ever reached the end of a portrait thinking, just a few more tweaks, and then watched it get tighter and tighter until all the life was gone, this is for you. Today, I'm walking you through the system that I use to finish oil paintings like Sargent would. That is to say, finish them without overworking them. Whether you're doing a master copy or you're working on an original painting, this is going to change how you paint. If you're stuck in a loop of overworking your paintings, I've also got a free mini masterclass in addition to help you beyond this video. It's all about loosening up your process with strategies inspired by Sargent. The link's down in the description if you want to take the next step. All right, so a big reason that portraits tighten up at the end of the painting is that most painters don't have a clear idea of what finished actually means. So they default to chasing perfection versus going for finished. When you're staring at your reference, whether it's a photo, a live model, even a Sargent painting that you're doing a master copy of, well, we tend to fixate on the detail. That is to say, we compare what's missing instead of looking at what's working. So unless you're already working from a reference that already shows you the brushwork, like the kind of Photoshop mock-up that I teach my students how to make, or you're doing a master copy and you can actually see Sargent's brushwork firsthand in your reference, it's really hard to tell when to stop. So here's the system that I use to avoid that spiral and finish decisively. First things first, we have to make sure you have a really clear vision of where you're headed. So with a master copy, I like to hold it up beside the painting that I'm actually working on. So here, with this particular Sargent master copy, I have the reference of Sargent's painting that I can hold up right next to it as I paint. And I can compare the reference, or specifically Sargent's brushwork, directly to what I've been doing. The idea here is that if I have a really clear vision for what the finished brushwork should look like, there's not really any excuse to overwork that brushwork or go too far with the detail. Okay, so once I have these side by side, I need to name the primary problem or the primary gap that's holding me back from actually bringing this to a finish. So when I look at these side by side, I ask myself, can I point to one area of the piece that's not working or one area that would need to change in order to elevate the entire piece? If you can't pinpoint what that is, you need to be done, at least for now. Otherwise, you're just going to keep noodling on the piece and just guessing until you stumble on the right answer, hopefully. But that can lead to a lot of overworking. Now, let's say you check those previous two boxes. Next, you need to actually know what the solution is. So can you name the exact brushstroke or change in value or adjustment to the drawing that will fix that one issue that you're identifying? If not, don't guess. Guessing leads to overworking because by definition, you're putting down more strokes than you need as you search for the solution. And then finally, you need to make sure that you have a proven technique to address the problem. So if you know what you need to do to clean up that one brushstroke, well, you better be really confident that you have the technical ability to put down the correct mark or to clean up something that's already on the canvas without making a mess. If you think you might be able to do this, but you're just not 100% sure, this is a great opportunity to go ahead and just do a test first. Get out a scrap piece of canvas, set yourself up so that you have what's very close to your own painting, at least for that one little section on that test sheet of canvas, and then try out making the adjustment that you're planning on putting into your final painting. This is going to allow you to actually see if you have the skills necessary to make the change that you need to make to finish the piece. And if you find out you don't, well, you can either practice or you can back off and you can put a pause on this painting before you overwork it. This is just kind of the high-level overview of how I like to solve these problems. But if already you're listening to this and this system is landing, this idea of, hey, I want a really clear, structured, not complicated, step-by-step workflow, well, I'm going deeper into how to use this to loosen up and structure your whole painting process in that free mini masterclass. It's linked below and it's designed to help you break this cycle for good, and I can't wait to see you there. Now, let's break down what I just shared at a high level a little bit more thoroughly with some examples, because this is where the real breakthroughs happen. So if we go back to step 1, this idea of having a clear vision for what the finished piece needs to look like, well, this one is deceptively simple. When I do a Sargent copy, for instance, I actually have the vision for the final piece already here. In some ways, this makes working on a master copy a lot easier and more intuitive than working on an original, because you're not having to make a lot of decisions as far as how do I abbreviate the thing that I'm seeing into brushstrokes, because Sargent has already done that for us. Instead, I can simply make sure that I'm putting down the right brush mark in the right color and value in the right spot, and applying that brushstroke in just the right way, that I'm getting the right kind of edges or texture in that brush stroke. Now, when it comes to my original work though, this gets a little bit more complicated because I don't have my own vision of the finished product there to just hold side by side to the work in progress. So what I actually like to do, and what I'm going to be teaching in the masterclass, is how to go from having just like a plain old reference image to mocking it up so that this gets us as close to the finished product as we can get, showing us things like, hey, where can this be simplified down to a single brushstroke? Or what detail can we really omit? Or where would it be ideal to simply put down a really interesting brush mark in here? The idea is that in my original work, once I have this mock-up put together, I don't have to worry so much about making creative decisions when I'm putting brush to canvas anymore. Instead, just like the master copy, I can break this down into a really simple process that is essentially foolproof. So hopefully that gives you a really good incentive to actually be working off of a really solid plan and having a vision for what finished looks like. So now let's explore this idea of naming a primary problem and go a little bit more in depth into that. So naming the primary problem, the one thing that if you just address this one thing in the painting, everything else is going to be easier or unnecessary as far as bringing the piece to a finish. Doing this, figuring out what is the one thing, it forces prioritization. I might see 6 little things that could be improved. Like, all right, what if I adjust the color of the forehead? Or what if I correct the value of the hairline? Or what if I compress these shapes together so it looks a little bit more simple and elegant like Sargent painted it? And just so you know, these are just kind of general examples of the kinds of things that I might be seeing. Well, by naming the one thing that is clearly the biggest issue, that in addressing that, everything else gets easier or better, or it becomes unnecessary to make those other adjustments that I was seeing, this winds up saving me a lot of time and a lot of guesswork, which ultimately leads to me putting in more brushstrokes than I actually need to finish the piece. So for instance, a really common issue that can happen in portrait painting is that you go in and you paint this one eye and it looks incredible, and then you realize that the eye isn't actually on the right place in the head and it doesn't relate to any other facial feature that you've painstakingly painted. But on top of that, the eye looks too detailed, and maybe you exaggerated the contrast between the highlight in the eye and the dark pupil of the eye too much. So in this case, the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary is to go ahead and move that eye. Yes, you're going to have to repaint, but in doing so, you're giving yourself the opportunity to go ahead and avoid getting too much into detail or exaggerating that contrast too much. Or it could be that you notice that the eye is off, but you suspect that the nose and the mouth are off too. But once you actually get that eye in the right place, everything actually comes together and suddenly the proportions look right. Now, if I can't identify what the one thing is, that keystone change that really needs to be made, it's usually because the painting is already so close to the finish that maybe I just need to take a step back, or I'm just mentally tired, which painting absolutely will make you. Both of these things mean that I really need to step back and take a break until I can identify what the one thing is. And that's when I can re-enter this process and dive back into the painting. Now on to the third step, which is knowing the fix. Here is where most painters spiral. You think you're just about to fix something, but you're not really sure what. So you just start noodling. But if you can't articulate what the fix looks like, whether it's an issue with your values or the shapes or the colors you've put down or the brushwork is just the wrong texture, it's not ready to be painted. It's still an open question. And questions really need to be answered not as you're putting brush to canvas. This should be answered well in advance so that you can simply focus on mixing up the right color, choosing the right brush, and putting that mark down in the right place. All right, and then finally, we come to this idea of using a proven technique. Say I want to soften an edge that just feels too abrupt. I don't just dive in. I actually will look at what the brushstroke needs to look like, and I'll be able to do this because I have a clear vision for what the final product needs to look like. In this case, it's made really easy for me by having my reference of Sargent's actual painting here. Because I can look at this, it's really easy for me to go ahead and say, okay, I don't quite like how I painted the brow here. I need to get a slightly different edge quality. I'm not just going to dive in and repaint it hoping that I get it right this time. Instead, I need to be able to actually look at what Sargent did and say, okay, do I think I know how to make that mark? And if so, what conditions need to be correct to get this kind of an edge or this kind of texture in my brushstroke? Or what is necessary for me to be able to bring that value up without making the color chalky, or whatever the issue actually happens to be. If I look at it and I know without a shadow of a doubt, hey, I know how to put this on canvas and I should be able to do it right now, full confidence, okay, go ahead, go get it. But if I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, actually a great example of this happens up in the hair in this particular piece. There was already a lot of paint that had gone down beforehand, so I knew Sargent's canvas should have been pretty wet, but these little highlights in the hair really have a dry brush texture. And I was thinking to myself as I painted, okay, won't my wet paint on the brush just blend in with the wet paint underneath and make a totally different mark? Well, I actually had to do a test to figure this out. I needed to go ahead and put down some paint, let it tack up for just long enough to see when the marks that I put down would have this dry brush effect. Then, once I actually understood what the consistency of the drying paint needed to be, combined with the right brush and the right consistency of paint on that brush, suddenly going in and putting in these same kind of marks just wasn't an issue anymore. So the idea here is that you're tackling this just one brush stroke at a time, one decision at a time. If you don't know how to do it, go ahead and test. Test until you feel confident, and then you can finally make the adjustment. Again, if at any point in this workflow you realize that you don't have the answer, well, that probably means that you need to take a step back and pause, or you're going to get sucked into overworking. And speaking of which, here are a few traps that I see all the time when it comes to the finishing stage and overworking paintings. The first is a big one, and it is the comfort loop of petting the canvas. You know that thing, kind of like when you're petting a cat, where they're in your lap and you have your hand on their back and it just feels so nice. And before you know it, you realize that you have been sitting there petting them for half an hour. Well, the exact same thing can happen on a painting, where you just go to a section of the painting that feels really mentally comforting. It's just going really well, you really like how it's looking, and you just rhythmically pet your brush over that spot on the canvas over and over. It's almost like your brain is taking a little bit of a nap, even though you can tell yourself you're still painting. This is one of the biggest painting pitfalls when it comes to putting more brushstrokes on canvas than is really necessary. And I think every painter has had an experience with this or experiences it on the regular. It's kind of a normal human tendency that we need to have more awareness around in order to fix. So the solution here is that you need to start to recognize when you are simply habitually touching a part of the painting just to feel like you're keeping busy or productive, even though you don't really have a clear intention. So start asking yourself every time you put brush to canvas, what is this brushstroke actually for? If you don't have a good answer to that question, you probably need to take a break. But there are a few other tips that you can use to just help prevent the situation in the first place. One is to go ahead and move your palette back a good distance away from your painting. So in most studio spaces, this means setting up your palette maybe like 8 feet away from the easel itself. That way, every time you need to mix up your paint, you have to physically move away from the painting. This also helps you to take the painting in at a distance and stop getting so sucked into that detail and instead take in the big picture. But it also just prevents you from getting into that place where you're just kind of used to constantly touching your brush to your canvas. Another example here, this actually relates to my student Kitty. This came up for her recently in a landscape painting. She came to me and she had followed this exact workflow, and she had identified that one section of her landscape, let's just say the horizon line, was really giving her an issue. So what did she do? Well, she said, why don't I go work into the clouds for a while? The clouds are looking really good. And I said to her, Kitty, the clouds do look good. They look fantastic. In fact, I don't think you actually need to change them. Why are you thinking that you're going to solve the horizon issue by reworking an area of the painting that already looks really great? And as we were having this conversation, it just clicked for her that this was a habit that she was getting into. She felt intimidated by the sections of the painting where she didn't know what the solution was. And that really goes back to this entire workflow that I am talking you through in this video. Kitty had gotten to the point where she knew what the problem was, she just didn't actually know how to fix it. And so in order to keep painting, she just kept working into the parts that were going well, even though they actually already looked so good they could have been finished. What Kitty really needed in that moment was to step away and either answer the question for herself of what had to happen around that horizon line to fix that area of the painting that was driving her crazy, or she needed to come to me and see if I could help her with that. And the result was that she wound up doing both. She didn't touch the painting until she had a really clear plan. She put in those practice reps, and wouldn't you know it, when she went back to finish that painting, she knew exactly what to do and really enjoyed the result so much more than if she'd simply kept at it in the moment out of sheer stubbornness or thinking that she needed to just fight her way through this rather than being really intentional. So I hope that this example today really highlights that finishing isn't about perfection. It's not about more detail. It is about trust. Trusting your reference, trusting your plan, trusting your ability to pinpoint what the problem is, and trusting in your ability to stop and take a break when you are hitting a snag in the process, and then letting yourself come back when you actually know what has to be done. If this video helped, I've got new videos every week about painting loosely and building a process that actually works. But if you want help applying this on your own, make sure to check out the free mini masterclass linked below. I'm so excited to see you there. And in the meantime, let me know in the comments, where do you get stuck when it comes to finishing a portrait? Does it have to do with your brushwork or certain facial features? If you look back at your progress, do you have a really good feeling about one of the earlier stages of your painting and just wish you had stopped there? I'd love to hear more, and I'll be addressing a lot of the answers to those questions inside of the masterclass. I'm excited to see you there, and until then, happy painting.